Hello, thanks for joining me. This is Mr. Ripka, and this is Ripka Reads Neruda during Corona. Today we have reached poem LXII 62. He continues with his imagery of death and forgetfulness and oblivion and sleeping, as he has imbued his last couple poems with such imagery. We mentioned yesterday that this book was written in 1973, only months before his death. So death, I'm sure, was on his mind. Let's go ahead and see what kind of questions a poet would ask about life and death who happens to be at the end of his life. It's a profound way to approach these questions, I think. So let's go ahead and begin. En español, ¿qué significa persistir en el callejón de la muerte? En el desierto de la sal, ¿cómo se puede florecer? En el mar del no pasa nada, hay vestido para morir. Cuando ya se fueron los huesos, ¿quién vive en el polvo final? So you heard la muerte, the noun, death. And then a little bit later you heard morir, the infinitive, the verb, of course, but the infinitive version of it, morir, to die. And then the last two, well, I guess three if you count the article, the last three words of this poem are el polvo final, the final dust. Let's see what Neruda is asking. What does it mean to persist on the alley of death? Yes, ¿qué significa persistir? What does it signify? What does it mean to persist in the callejón, the alley of death? That's an interesting combination of words, the alley of death, right? The alley. So not a graveyard, but an alleyway, and an alleyway of death. Kind of reminds me of that Bob Dylan song, Destruction Row. No, that's not it. There's a song, I can't remember. Maybe you can, but it has something about row, and it's about a lot of death and stuff. Beautiful imagery in that poetry too. It's a very that song. It's a very literary song. Desolation Row. That's what it's called. Don't you love when that happens? Mysterious life. Thoughts come from where? That's a Mark Ripka question, not a Neruda question. Let's get back to some Neruda. Number 2. How in salt desert is it possible to blossom? We had the alley of death in the previous question, and we have the salt desert, or a desert of salt, to keep the alley of death in the desert of salt. So he's asking in the previous one, what does it mean to persist in this alley of death? And then and then the next one, is it the same as the alley of death, also the desert of salt? Is it a different place? Is it similar? It's interesting, who knows? But he's saying how in the desert of salt is it possible to blossom? So how are we going to persist if we can't blossom? Maybe is one way to approach these. Excuse me. Number 3, in the sea of nothing happens, are there clouds to die in? Yes, en el mar de no pasa nada, where the nothing happens. So in the sea of nada, nothing, no pasa, happening, are there clothes, vestments, vestido, para morir, to die in? Wow, we have some interesting imagery. We have the alley of death, the desert of salt, the sea of nothing happens. I love it. Whew. Death, deserts, alleys, deserts, and seas. All imagery he's using to contemplate death. Let's see what his last one says. Now that the bones are gone, Who lives in the final dust? The final dust. Of course, that's another image for death, right? The bones have gone, they're gone, they have dissolved, they have turned into dust, disintegrated into dust. And now that the bones are gone and have disintegrated, who lives in the final dust? El polvo final. Indeed, who does live there? It's a good question. I wonder if he means the person who has died and the bones are now in that dust. Who is living there now? Who was my friend or my enemy or whoever? Who is that human? Who lives there now? Wow. So we're going to go through these questions one more time. Once again, these are questions from a Pulitzer Prize winning poet on not his deathbed, but the last months of his life, reflecting obviously about life. And here we have questions about what does it mean to live and what happens when we die. And of course he gives these profound questions in such wonderful, surreal, childlike almost imagery and imagination. Here we go. What does it mean to persist on the alley of death? How, in the desert of salt, is it possible to blossom? In the sea of nothing happens, are there clothes to die in? And now that the bones are gone, who lives in the final dust? Thank you once again for joining me. I really appreciate everybody out there who has, for 62 days, 62 poems, continued to explore these questions with me. I really do want to say thank you, for I have read these before. I really enjoy Neruda. I've read these before, but I've never read them day in, day out, day in, day out, and just kind of accumulated the imagery. And so this has been a complete group work. And so thank you for allowing me, giving me the chance in a way to explore this book with you. We're not finished yet, though. We still have 12 more days of Neruda. And I will see you for Neruda 63 tomorrow.